Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, wherever in the world you may be joining us from today. My name is Francesco Del Carpio, and I am the ŷIyârhe Operations Coordinator. I would like to officially open the third session of the Drones for Public Health, Safety, Risk, Humanitarian, and Emergency Management Speaker Series, presented in partnership with York University's Advanced Disaster and Emergency Rapid Response Lab, or ADRSIM, and the Southern Alberta Institute of Technology Center for Innovation and Research in Unmanned Systems, or SAIT-CIRIS. I would like to begin today's session with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge and recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territory upon which our campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. The area is known as Takaranto and has been caretaken by the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and that the territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. As this is an online event, our participants may be joining from various locations, so I strongly encourage you to learn about the traditional land upon which you are located. With this, I would like to welcome our speaker and our participants from around the world. Welcome to our webinar. I would now like to also introduce our lead partner from SAIT-CIRIS for the series, Michel Arif. Michel is a research staff and geospatial analyst at the Center of Innovation and Research in Unmanned Systems at the Southern Alberta Institute of Technology. She holds a master's degree in disaster and emergency management from Royal Roads University, as well as an applied bachelor's in geographic information systems from SAIT, and an undergraduate degree from the University of Toronto. Her research interests focus on how climate change influences disaster patterns and how emerging technologies, such as drones, can aid in disaster mitigation efforts. Additionally, Michel actively volunteers with the Canadian Red Cross, contributing to the emergency response team and personal disaster assistance programs. So thank you, Michel, for being here today and for all of your support in putting this series together. And so now, before introducing today's speaker, I would like to just quickly go over some housekeeping rules for the session. The chat is open to everyone for general comments and introductions. At the end of the presentation, we will have some time for Q&A. So please use the Q&A webinar function to ask any questions you may have for Mr. Fountain. Feel free to also ask your questions as they come up throughout the presentation, but keep in mind that we will be addressing them all after the presentation. Without further ado, it is now my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Mr. Reg Fountain. Mr. Reg Fountain has been the Director of Emergency Management for the Stoney Nakoda Nations, SNN, comprising of Bearspaw, Chiniki, and Goodstoney First Nations since 2022. The SNN has 6 reserve areas stretching over 300 kilometers from Bighorn Reserve in the north near Nordegg, Alberta, to Eden Valley Reserve in the south near Longview, Alberta. The majority of the nations reside in the Minithini Reserve area between Cochrane and Canmore, Alberta. Mr. Fountain has been involved in emergency management since 1995. He has participated in disaster response and humanitarian assistance operations in Canada and internationally. Of note, while serving in the Canadian Armed Forces, he participated in disaster relief operations in Indonesia and in response to Hurricanes Katrina and Rita. In Canada, he participated in humanitarian assistance operations for the Ontario-Quebec ice storm of 1997, and while employed as the Director of Emergency Social Services for the province of Alberta, he supported disaster response operations related to the Chuckegg Creek wildfire in 2019 and the response to the Fort McMurray and Fort Vermilion flooding of 2020. Mr. Fountain also has a postgraduate degree in disaster and emergency management from Royal Roads University and is accredited by the International Association of Emergency Managers as a certified emergency manager. With that, Mr. Fountain, thank you so much for joining us today. We're really looking forward to your presentation, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Francesco. I'll share my screen and hopefully I do not screw it up. Can you confirm that you're seeing the title page?
Yep. Looks
Excellent, thank you. To one and all, Umbawastich from the land of the Η이yârhe Nakoda, the people of the mountains. Thank you for the invitation to speak on this extremely important subject and how the technology is improving the emergency preparedness response capabilities within the Η이yârhe Nakoda, the Stoney Nakoda Nation, and the rural and remote areas in which we live. So with that, we seem to be having a problem with moving the slides. There we go. What I hope to cover this morning, just a little bit of an orientation regarding the nation itself, so that people get a better understanding of the geography in which we work. I'll look at the primary risks and hazards that are facing the Stoney Nakoda and the specific geographic areas in which they live, what we currently have, what we hope to attain, what we have with our partnerships, with our mutual aid organizations and jurisdictions that provide mutual support to us, what we hope to be able to acquire in future, and then how we are using remotely piloted systems for the prevention, mitigation, preparedness, and response areas within emergency management. Lastly, to touch on what does the future hold, and then I'll open it up for questions, should you have any at that time. The Stoney Nakoda Nation, as was mentioned by Francesco, is comprised of 3 separate and unique First Nations, the Bearspaw, Chiniki, and Good Stoney. We have those 3 major areas, Bighorn in the north, Minithini, which some people would see on their Google Maps as Morley, now has been officially changed back to the Ηyârhe, the Stoney language, to that of Minithini, and Eden Valley in the south. We have approximately 5,600 nation members that are spread across those 3 areas. So I'm speaking specifically of those nation members who are living on our reserve areas. So for some who would better understand it on the map, Bighorn in the north, just south and west of Nordegg, Minithini, which is west of Cochrane, east of Canmore, along the Bull River and bisected by Highway 1 and 1A, and Eden Valley, which is basically the gateway to the Kananaskis country in the south, just west of Longview. Emergency management is responsible for all of those from Minithini. So if something happens in either one of the other two areas, my responsibility is to deploy with whatever team I need to deal with that emergency that occurs. Bighorn, probably the most remote of the 3 areas, 40 minutes on a bad day or winter day from Nordegg, and definitely in the midst of the boreal forest or wildfire hazards in the province. It was a challenge last year when we had the wildfires that were threatening the area, and having to move the 250 some odd people to Red Deer. So the planning preparation, and both at the nation level and in the hosting community, was an interesting opportunity in Indigenous, non-Indigenous dynamics. Minithini, again, along the Bull River between Cochrane and Canmore, both sides of the river. Predominance of the 3 nations reside here. And last but not least, Eden Valley, west of Longview, on the gateway to Highway 40 and the Kananaskis area. We share the same risks that most of the communities who live in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains have with the wildfire areas, the wildfire challenges that we face. The floods that took place in 2013 have been mitigated, or the threat of them has been mitigated somewhat, but we still have the challenge of the Bull River and what should happen should there be a problem with any of the dams that are upstream of Minithini. And with climate change, we see the weather patterns changing such that we are dealing with extreme cold and extreme heat far more often than we had in the past. Less snow, but just more cold. And during the summer, heat in the plus 30, with the humidex getting into the plus 35. Very much a challenge for our elders, for those with young families, and especially in areas that have that are without air conditioning. From a technological hazard perspective, the major threats we have, or the major hazards, are train derailment, as we have the CPKC, Canada Pacific, Kansas City rail line going right through the heart of Manithani, right beside a number of residential areas. Derailments there would cause major issues. That that line contains or carries a large amount of hazardous materials on most of the trains that go through. And this gets coupled with the fact that you have a number of oil and gas wells, including hydrogen sulfide wells, in proximity to the rail line. So you could have a double whammy, if you will, should something untoward happen there. And then we get to the human cost. There is still human trafficking that is ongoing, where you have people who will try and acquire girls, boys, men, women on the nation, hitchhiking or otherwise. We've had people actually attempt to kidnap people off the nation. It is something we deal with. It is something that it does not make the news a great deal, but it is something we are dealing with. And the scourge of today's youth, illegal drugs, fentanyl, methamphetamine, and now you have fentanyl that's laced with other contaminants that preclude the use of naloxone to deal with the challenges of that drug. So as I said, the Manithani is bisected by two major highways, Highway 1 and Highway 1A. Highway 11 up north is not a major issue, nor is the rural highway in Eden Valley. So the biggest challenge from an emergency management and for the use of drones, if you will, is along the Manithani corridor. Traffic accidents are routine. However, when you have them happen during winter, then you have people who are going to require additional support and may require additional care in terms of emergency medical treatment and in how to move traffic in and around the accident site so that it does not become more of an impediment to progress for traffic along that the throughway. Again, you've got the drug trafficking aspect that comes in on the highways, but also uses the roads that cut into the highway, the gravel roads that traverse the nation's area. Poaching has become an increasingly dangerous problem. And surprisingly enough, also the poaching of eagles for eagle feathers and other adornments that people have got for their traditional cultural costumes. We have had members of other First Nations trespass upon the nation's land to poach the eagles, both golden and bald, so that they can have those feathers for their costumes. Very disappointing in that. Oil and gas, we have a number of oil wells, including hydrogen sulfide. The challenge is getting the alerts and the response in time and understanding exactly where the downwind hazard will be. And in that, we are now using drones to assist us in that depiction, recognizing that the oil and gas companies have a responsibility to respond. But since they are closest to be in Calgary, it could be an hour before we see any support. So we are on our own to provide the response necessary to provide the safety and security of our nation members. So what are we using right now? we have a drone. We have a number of qualified pilots. The drone team would be a two-person team. You would have the drone operator, and then you would have the observer to ensure that the data, the imagery is what has been tasked to provide, and being then able to provide immediate reports to the emergency coordination center or the incident commander, as the case may be. We were very fortunate to be part of a program with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, who supported the training of 10 pilots, of which we have 4 who are now advanced qualified pilots. So we have a number of people that can utilize the system, but we have 4 that, with their advanced training, are able to respond quickly to the requirements of emergency response. We have put in a request through Indigenous Services Canada for the acquisition of a thermal camera capable drone so that we can do search both in low visibility or in darkness, as the case may be, um, especially if we're looking for lost people in the forest, hotspots in wildfires, or potential poachers moving in and around the area. This is hoped to be able to be acquired in early spring of 2025, so that should anything untoward happen during the G7 event along the nation's areas anyway, we will be much better prepared, both from a daytime electro-optical system and an infrared or TI system, to be able to deal with whether it be trespassers or other incidents that may take place. Our partner assets. Cochrane RCMP provides the predominant support to the Manithani RCMP detachment. Cochrane RCMP has a number of trained drone pilots and has the Mavic 300 drone available. And should we require it, they would deploy from Cochrane on our request, or if the Manithani RCMP detachment makes a request, they will be immediately deployed. And that gives us at least 2 drones, one which would be thermal camera equipped, to be able to provide support for whatever emergency operation is ongoing at that time. It's hoped that Cochrane RCMP will be provided additional drones, and eventually, when our own Manithani detachment is stood up, hopefully in the summer of 2025, it too will be provided its own drone with qualified pilots to augment and reinforce that which we have within the Stoney Nakoda Nation. Mutual Aid, Cochrane Ground Search and Rescue is our ground search partner. They are equipped with a drone with a day camera only. They are hoping to go to a TI type device as well. Alberta Wildfire has a number of drones, and they are prepared to provide assistance should it be required, similar to CPKC. And if more drones are required for the RCMP, they can draw upon those assets they have deployed to other detachments within the South Alberta District. All in all, we are increasing the capabilities and the numbers of drones that we have available to us, so that should we have to deploy to multiple areas simultaneously, the nation will remain covered with that drone support that is going to be construed as a major factor in preparedness and response for emergencies on the nation. Excuse me. Our partnership with the South Alberta Institute of Technology runs on 2 lines of operation. First, from a medical side, they have been working with Stoney Health Services in the provision of medical aid to remote locations using drones and equipment either dropped from drone, tethered, or otherwise, to provide emergency medical support, where you have medical equipment that is contained within this package that is immediately linked to Foothills Hospital, so that the emergency doctor or the doctor at the emergency room at Foothills can do analysis of a wound or of a casualty, and provide suggestions for treatment, or assist the casualty in providing self-care until such time as emergency medical staff can arrive on scene and help the casualty with whatever injury they are suffering from. The other line of operation is SAIT working with the emergency management department for the integration of hazmat sensor data, where SAIT has drones with the capability of flying specific sensors for a number. I believe there's 5 types of hazardous materials on one type of sensor that they could fly along the CPKC main line and assist my first responders in identifying the hazardous material, the concentration, and assist us in developing the plume model to ensure the safety and security of our first responders, but also in identifying those areas of residential areas where we can evacuate, if necessary, nation members and put them in a position of safety. This is an ongoing aspect with SAIT, and we are very fortunate to have that capability willing to provide such support to us. This includes SAIT's willingness to help train nation members to become drone pilots to the advanced level and increase our own capability. So this capacity building is a partnership for which we are extremely grateful. We wish we had that opportunity to use similar type of platforms on the nation, but we all have to start at the bottom, and we're going to continue to improve our capabilities with the support of SAIT and the SAIT Cirrus team. So, with that, what do we use it for? I'm using the drone systems to support active surveillance on the nation's perimeters. My range patrol teams patrol the perimeters of the Manithani area, and if necessary, can deploy to either of the other two to provide perimeter support, reconnaissance, or surveillance, if you will. These are now going to be reinforced through the use of drones and the drone team. Similar to the counter drug or from the opioid task force, to identify areas where drug traffickers seem to be entering the nation, identifying homes that may be used by drug traffickers as laboratories or cooking stations, if you will. We use them to support the anti-poaching actions. We talked about the poaching of bald and golden eagles. We actually have people who have shot deer and have left them lying there to attract birds of prey to feed on the carcass, and when they come down and alight on the carcass or near the carcass, are then harvested by these poachers. We're using drones to identify areas where this has taken place and put law enforcement in place prior to the birds of prey being harvested. Conducting our missing person operations, going along the routes that people have been using for decades to get to and from Cochrane or Canmore, and should they go astray or get lost in the bush, to be able to find them, either independently because a mother or father or elder has identified that a child or a person has become lost, or in support of the RCMP, who has been similarly requested to provide such ground search actions. Unfortunately, we also have to deal with a counter arson. We have a number of issues regarding people who wish to burn abandoned homes or other structures, and the pain that this causes nation members to watch homes go up, whether they're being used or whether it was previously been lived in and had no longer been used, is a blight upon the nation. And we're now actively using drones in the counter arson program to identify those that are approaching abandoned homes or have left a home that has gone with a suspicious fire. It's a challenge, but it's something that we need to do to increase the safety and security for nation members. For the preparedness side, when it comes to wildfire, we actively check cut blocks, fire guards, the perimeters, the trails, to identify areas that perhaps need additional vegetation management operations, and then work with our partners both in the Forest Resource Improvement Association of Alberta, Indigenous Services Canada, and logging companies or forest management companies to assist us in improving or adding to our list of fire guards and cut block. We manage this on our own and help to ensure the mitigation of wildfires in all three areas. Land and water management operations is a nascent activity, identifying the areas that can be used for recreation, that can be used for agriculture. The Minithini area is predominantly a grazing area, but there are specific areas that can be used for the planting of cultural herbs and medicinal plants that can be used by our elders in provision of native medicines. Livestock and bison management. We have a bison herd just to the west of the Minithini townsite area, and I don't know if anybody's ever come across a herd of bison that get spooked, but if you want to try and stop a 1,500-pound bison by saying don't go there, they don't listen all that well. Identifying what could be spooking them, causing them issues, whether they be four-legged or two-legged, is a great benefit in ensuring that the bison, which is a sacred animal to the ΗIyârhe Nakoda, are well looked after. Similarly, the cattle that graze throughout the area, should a fire take place and they have to be moved, to be able to monitor where the livestock is being moved to and how it's being moved to, again, protect the livelihood of the nation members. And last but not least, the annual powwows, the rodeos, the sweat lodge activities that take place prior to those, to ensure that they are safe, to ensure that they remain safe from outside people who may wish to cause them harm, from environmental hazards that they may not be aware of, and to ensure that while the event takes place, that it is done in a safe and secure manner for the enjoyment of the participants, and to ensure the laws that are governing them are followed. In response, think of it more as a case by case response action or activity. But if you had a derailment or a burn at a fire at a whalehead, use the use of the drone and the drone team to work with the incident commander to determine the size, the scope, the scale, the leading edges, and then be able to effectively deploy first responders to deal with that challenge. Feed that information back to the emergency coordination center so that it too can be fused into a situational awareness platform to be shared with our mutual supporting partners. To support evacuation operations. Some of the areas of Minithini are very rugged, very difficult to get to, and if you have to use alternate routes, to be able to inform my traffic control parties, my law enforcement and security staff, where to divert traffic from, to ensure that the movement it is away from the hazard and into an area of safety. This gives an additional capability to reinforce those actions from our partners. If Banff National Park or Canmore or the Kananaskis Improvement District had to evacuate, we could use our drone and our additional drone capabilities of our partners to identify primary routes, alternate routes, secondary routes for the evacuation of the people coming from the affected area. I already have spoke of livestock control operations, but if it's during a WUI incident, to ensure that the fences that need to be cut to move the livestock have been done, identify any additional supporting mechanisms that need to be put in place to support that. And we have, by living in the mountains, we have a cougar and grizzly habitat that we are fortunate to share with them. When you have mother grizzly at the start of the summer period, identifying where they're going, identifying if there's going to be any issues to the people in the area where the grizzly is moving to, or a cougar and her kits or cubs, depending on how people wish to call them, to identify the potential areas and then put out alerts on our public alert system to ensure people are aware that mother grizzly and cub or cubs, mother cougar and cubs are moving through this area, bring their companion animals in, minimize the risk of a animal human interaction with any negative uh, rea- with a with a negative response from those who are coming across mother grizzly in the bush. In the Emergency Coordination Center, which is located in the Tribal Administration Building, the deployed liaison team would have a liaison member within my Emergency Coordination Center. They would take that information and feed it to my situational awareness unit to ensure that it is fused within the overall common operating picture for situational awareness. That would be at a major complex or large scale emergency or disaster. Generally speaking, it would be the drone team dealing with the incident commander and myself, um, the incident commander on site, myself as the director of the Emergency Coordination Center, and I would stand up additional assets as required. My intent over the next year or so is to complete the integration of the data within the common operating picture, including hazmat data that be fed from SATE drones to support my plume modeling because my emergency coordination center uses the Cameo Aloha plume modeling and chemical analysis software. So this would be used to support that and the continuing evolution of increased information, excuse me, to first responders and nation members and tribal leadership. Also want to be able to push the information out to our municipal partners, those in the neighboring jurisdictions, the municipal district of Bighorn, town of Canmore, town of Cochrane, Kananaskis Improvement District, or whomever needs it, including being able to push this out to the Provincial Emergency Coordination Center and Alberta Wildfires Operations Center. So we have made small steps in moving forward. We wish to continue to do so, but eventually to make the jump to be able to be a fusion point for all such imagery and data, and then be able to disseminate that in a distributed means to any and all partners, both near and far. The future for remote piloted systems within the Stoney Nakoda nations. I want to be able to have drones and drone teams in all three areas. Not that I have to deploy. I want to be able to have momentarily capable response so that the safety of those who are, whether there be 300 kilometers from me and 40-minute drive from Nordig, or response from Diamond Valley or Okotoks or Longviews heading towards Eden Valley, but it's going to be 45 minutes to get there. To be able to provide a level of information to enhance the safety and security of the nation members. I want to be able to support all the nation activities, not just emergency response, land management, water management, the identification of areas suitable for the planting and cultivation of cultural herbs and medicines to support the traditional teachings and learnings that our elders are providing to the nation's youth. I want to be able to support the agricultural and livestock actions of all three areas, whether it be horses, cattle, bison, uh, to support the livelihoods of the nation members. And lastly, to deal with those who wish to detract from that, those who wish to poach animals, whether or birds, those who wish to traffic in illicit drugs, those who wish harm to the Stoney Nakoda people, to identify, prevent, mitigate, and where possible, apprehend and provide them the opportunity to go in front of the court system and be dealt with accordingly. And the last but not least, to have this inculcated, and by this I mean the ability to use drones, pilot training, the identification of how best drones can be used for the nation, to inculcate that within our secondary school systems and have nation members become the pilots, the users, the technicians, and eventually the leaders for the continued evolution of technology within the Stoney Nakoda Nation. Pending your questions, that concludes my brief. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to having any questions or being able to try and answer any questions that you may have. Francesco, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, I would just like to first thank you very much for the great presentation. And I would like to encourage those in the audience to please put your questions either in the chat where Michelle is monitoring them or here in the Q&A. I see we already do have two questions, but I encourage you all to ask as many as you'd like. But we can start with these two. If not, I also have a couple of questions of my own, but we'll start with the audience questions first. Well, first question comes here from Daryl, who asks, will you be looking to expand it into your fire response in emergencies via thermal imaging in areas where smoke may prevent humans from accessing, or reading placards in train derailments or tanker truck collisions where dangerous gas releases may be a factor?
Great question. It ties into how I want to grow the capability. With the thermal camera, I'll be able to identify the leading edges of interface wildfires, so that will help with that. I would like to be able to get my own gas sensors, but that's a capability that at present is beyond my reach. So I'm thankful that I have SAID as a partner in that regard. The the ability to fuse that information and data, both imagery or sensor, into a common operating picture is a challenge, and that we're working together with SAID. Is it something we want to do? Yes. Is it something we need to do? Most definitely. The challenge is to acquire the capability and the funding through which it can be sustainable on the nation. I hope I've answered your question in that regard.
Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that answers the question, but Daryl, if you have any follow-ups, please feel free. Um, Next question comes from Agnes, who says, hi, Reg. Thank you for your talk. Are there any privacy concerns you have been made aware of from residents in or around SMN about images of their homes or activities being captured, or how the data is stored for later access?
That's an excellent question. From a freedom of information protection, what we did as part of when we were doing the work with the RCMP was demonstrate to the nation members and tribal leadership that once the drone lifts off, the camera points in the direction of flight, not down to the ground until it reaches its designated tasked or targeted area. So they become aware that the camera of the drone does not point in people's kitchens or front steps, parking lots, or any other portions of their residence until it gets into an area where it's being targeted, i.e., if it was a fire or if they're looking for lost children, or lost people in the woods. If it comes across a house, it's because it's in the targeted area. Any imagery that is kept is always available for review should any of the nation members be concerned about a transgression or taking of imagery which they think is inappropriate. But the point that has been made both during our work with the RCMP and our work with the tribal leadership is the camera of the drone faces the direction of flight until over a targeted area, not anything else. It's also put into the SOPs that should information uh, on a particular residence be taken, that it's always kept in accordance with the Alberta Freedom of Information guidelines and that of the federal government for similar information for use in evidentiary purposes or to confirm that such information was not of a personal nature.
Great. Thank you so much for that answer. Just, I think a little bit of a follow-up because it's something I was interested in as well. Like, how do you, or first, do you store all of the images always gathered, or is there like a process for choosing what is kept on file and what's not? And how does that look like in terms of like how long you keep files for, how long you keep images? Is it encrypted? Like, what's the security around keeping the images that you do decide to keep, if there's a process for deciding, or everything that you have to store?
The SOP that I've developed that has not been approved by tribal council yet, because we do not have live imagery. Everything we have is stored on a SIM card, and when we take that back from the drone upon its landing, and then it would saved on a hard drive in an encrypted area on a specific hard drive. It is not put into the cloud, so it cannot be accessed by others. So it's an encrypted format stayed within a dedicated and secured hard drive that's only available to a small number of people. So that's what we're trying to put in. When we get the capability for real-time imagery, it would be the same thing. Such imagery would be stored on a specific machine, would not be stored in a cloud that's available to anybody else. The backup would be done again, similar to our normal IT would back up to another hard drive, but not in the cloud. Until such time as we get a cloud server that uh, will be able to have such restrictions placed upon it, any imagery would be kept safe and secure on a hard drive within a secure platform. And I believe right now my SOP is kept for a minimum of 5 years. I know there's some discussion as to how far that'll go, but right now I'm working on the securing of imagery for a 5-year period.
Okay, great. That's great to know. Thank you. Um, and what's the procedure for getting that approved? You said it's not approved by the nations yet. Um, is that something that you're working towards, or how does that process work then if the approval from the nations isn't there yet?
Sorry, Francesco, you
Oh,
faded away there.
sorry. Sorry, I think you said that like the SOP still wasn't like fully approved by the nations. So how does that process work, or the collaboration or the work with the nations kind of happen without the approval being there yet?
Well, that's the SOP I'm following. I've not had the chance to get it approved by tribal leadership, but until their approval, until I get a chance to table it in front of them, I'm following that procedure uh, as there is nothing else in place. So I'm going to ask for forgiveness if they want it to be less or more, but I want to ensure that the information that is collected is protected so that the nation members, should they ask questions, will will accept and believe in what we're doing and the the ability for us to protect the information that they have or that we've collected on their behalf or in response to an emergency.
Okay.
is being properly stored and looked after.
Okay. No, that makes sense. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying. And so we do have a follow-up question from Daryl. And oh, sorry, I'm not sure if I acknowledged who asked that initial question about privacy. So that was Agnes. So thank you, Agnes, for the question. And Daryl,
Oh,
thank you for your follow-up. Um, so Daryl asks, is there any anticipated NOTAM issues with drone flights and larger incidents where multiple jurisdictions are involved? And just for those who may not be aware of the in acronym, it's notice to airmen or notice to mission to air mission. So yeah.
thanks, Daryl, for bringing that point up. It is something that is becoming um, more of an issue as drone capabilities improve and we go from line of sight to beyond line of sight capabilities. At present, because we're operating, and this is where I look at Wade uh, to weigh in if I misspeak. I'm working at 300 feet or less, so there's within the nation areas. So a NOTAM is not required. If we were to go to a major, large scale, complex emergency, which has a unified command aspect, such as you had a wildfire where Wildfire Alberta was part of my emergency coordination center, or where we had um, drones with additional capability, whether it be through speed or the ability to fly at a higher altitude, then the air team that would be within the emergency coordination center would work with NAVCAN to develop any NOTAMs that are required. I know that Alberta Wildfire puts up NOTAMs for when they fly their drones. So if there was a wildfire aspect, I would look for them to identify where any of the lesser capable drones, such as what we have, where they could or could not operate. So again, until we go into a unified command, the requirement for NOTAMs may not necessarily be there. In the event of a major event that is outside our jurisdiction or capabilities, and in this I'm talking about the G7, then NOTAMs may be something that would, well, not maybe something, NOTAMs will be put in place to minimize flights of all aircraft in specific areas during the period. Now, how that's going to impact what we're doing, still to be determined. But again, as long the way I see it, Wade smack me upside the head if I misspeak. If I'm under 300 feet and I'm line of sight, I'm not going to be running foul of any of the directions or guidelines put out by NAVCAN in this regard.
Great. Thank you so much, Daryl, for the question, and thank you, Reg, for that answer, for the details there. Okay, Daryl just wrote a follow-up message. Thank you for the response. G7 was initially what brought the question to mind. Great, so thank you. I'm not seeing any more questions from the audience, but please, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them. Those who are on as panelists, Michelle, Wade, if you have questions, please also feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand if you want to ask. Um, but I do have, oh, Wade's got a question. Yeah, go ahead, Wade.
Thanks. Thanks, Francesco, and thanks, Reg, for your presentation. It was great. And just to add on to your comment, I mean, part of our project is to really help you in the community with the regulatory space. So yeah, I think you're spot on with your comments, and I think as we move forward to this G7 situation, it's going to be interesting to see just how that changes impacts in your airspace. So yeah, no questions more, just a comment, and thanks for your presentation. It was very informative. Great, thanks.
Great, thank you for adding that extra little bit to Reg's answer. Okay, well, I'm still not seeing any more questions from the audience, but yeah, I do have a couple myself. My first question was regarding the work that you're doing with surveillance and detection. So you mentioned um, using the drones for things like uh, arson and poaching, like detecting odd behavior or detecting potential threats in that. space. And then later on, you mentioned in the kind of future work you would like to do with drones, being able to have drone teams that can do daily surveillance and daily fly daily missions, and to be at each one of the nations that you work with. Um, but so I'm curious, kind of how does surveillance and detection with what you have now work in terms of recognizing those threats before they happen, and using the drones for surveillance and for those kinds of threats? Like, is it reliant on reports from the community, or is it, or how do you kind of even get to the point of being of like, okay, we need to fly a drone out here because there's a threat of arson or there's a threat of poaching? So yeah, I'm kind of curious, kind of what that process looks like now with the drones and the team that you have currently.
Well, thank you. Interesting dynamic. The range patrol that we are currently employing, the gentleman and his wife who are coordinating range patrol have long, I mean, they've been here, they were born here, they have traveled, they have hunted, they know the areas where the migratory aspects of moose and elk and deer in the area. They know the routes, trails, etc., where the hunters are going to come in from. So with the ability to launch a drone either prior to or to reinforce the range patrol activity, recognizing that with our 4 patrols that we will eventually have, we're not going to be able to cover all the ingress and egress points within the nation's boundaries. But identifying those that are seasonal, the deer and elk move at certain times, grizzly come up at certain times, identifying those routes and either putting a drone in up early to identify area, active reconnaissance to identify points where the range patrol team could go in and sit and provide surveillance over a specific area. So it's basically acting as a force multiplier to be able to identify spots where you can concentrate your resources, recognizing that you don't have the resources to do perimeter security the way some people may want us to. So that's my concept of operations for that, as a force multiplier to identify likely zones or identify areas where it's taking place. That's for the poaching and the and trespass. When it comes to arson, is to identify uh, and mark areas and see if we can do trend analysis for where arson activities are taking place, and put up again, acting as a force multiplier for my fire services. I've got a fire services with 2 engines that is on from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. After 8 p.m., I have to bring in support from outside communities. The If a nation member knows this, they may want to do actions after that time. Being able to use a drone to provide surveillance over possible spots, again, based on trend analysis, again, is simply to try and alleviate or mitigate the problem, prevent arson from taking place, or identify the individual and direct law enforcement to take them into custody. So poaching, arson is the same thing as identifying the areas, identifying uh, the locate not only the areas but the locations where this is taking place, and where the people would be could be located if they're going to harvest animals, where you'd be able to pick up the fact you've got 2 people or a group that are lying in wait for something to take place, and being able to put our protective services or law enforcement to them prior to the harvesting of animals, the illegal harvesting of animals takes place.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you for the detailed answers to both points. Um, I'm still not seeing any other questions from the audience, but again, please feel free to ask anything you'd like. Um, I do have one more question, and I think maybe we might have time for one more from the audience if anyone decides to drop one last question in. Um, But so kind of on the same vein, I guess, of you know, what you want to do in the future and what you're able to do now. Um, so you talked a little bit about the hazmat accidents and potential contamination accidents from derailments and other hazardous materials that come through on the highways near or the train um, railways near the nations that you work with. So, and you talked about like maybe doing a little bit of like modeling and plume um, tracking and analysis. So I'm curious, because you also mentioned that you don't yet have like gas sensors, for example. So I'm curious about the kind of equipment and sensors that you're looking forward to having in the future for these kinds of accidents or emergencies. But I'm also curious, um, currently, what um, what kind of detection technology or mapping technology or like plume prediction technologies do you have, like, and surveying, because you mentioned you could use it to like survey the area of where the plumes might travel, for example. So kind of how are you managing that now, and how do you look forward to expanding on that further in the future with new technology and new sensors that you may be able to get?
Okay, thank you, Francisco. Currently, if we had a spill, whether it be on the highway or derailment, my fire team is going to respond. They have a number of handheld sensors and personal sensors that would identify specific contaminants. So they have for example, they have a personal hydrogen sulfide sensor that they wear on their bunker gear. They have a handheld um, H2S sensor. They have the Ask Rail app on their computer assisted dispatch as well as on their phones. So if it was a derailment, we'll deal with that one first as an example. The Ask Rail app allows you to put in the number of the car that's on the side of the tanker car or any other car that's on the consist, and it would then tell you exactly what's in that. It will also tell you what's on that train. Should there be other cars that are perhaps in danger of being affected by fire? So they would be able to put that or identify that information. They also have the emergency response guide provided by Transport Canada on their on their uh, on their phones and on their computer assisted device. The Ηyârhe app provides downwind hazard for those specific chemicals based upon the data that's contained within the emergency response guide itself. It is an excellent application, and the information in there is up to date because it's reviewed and updated on a regular basis. But that's handheld, and that's for the on-site staff. In my emergency coordination center, I use the Cameo Aloha um, software programs to do um, more detailed downwind hazard plume modeling. And I can then take that information as it's being fed from the site commander. And he or she is telling me this is what's taking place. Here's the hazard, whether it's a leak, it's a burn, it's a whatever it is. Put that information in, develop the downwind plume modeling, and then provide further direction to other teams that may have to go out and evacuate an area while the fire team is dealing with the derailment or the spill. I would be able to use that information to share with uh, all the nation members because of my public alerting program. I can upload a map from Cameo Aloha into the public alerting program and push it out through all my nation members in that specific area. The public alerting program I have is set up that I can send alerts to Bighorn, Minithini, and Eden Valley either alone or together, depending on the size and scope of the event, and have people be made aware of what's going on, where the hazard is, or more importantly, where it's not, so that are they have knowledge of whether they're safe or whether they need to move, and if they have to move, to where should they move and how best to get there. So this is what we do now. What we would like to do is be able to have that real-time imagery from the site commander to the command post, to be able to put a drone with our sensors above where I don't have to call Wade and hope that he has time to deploy one of the larger, more capable drones with that sensor packaged to come down on the main line. To be able to have that information, fuse it, and disseminate it in as real time as possible. That's my ultimate goal. That's my dream, where I can assimilate, correlate, analyze, and then disseminate that information to nation members, to first responders, uh, simultaneously at the level required, whether you're a first responder and you want to know where your AEG levels are, or you're a nation member that says you're good where you are, you're fine, you have no worries, or you're in an area where you should come to the reception center, and this is where the reception center is, and this is the route you should use to take it. That's my ultimate goal.
Okay, amazing. Yeah, thank you so much for all the details. Um, yeah, and I hope that you're able to achieve those future goals um for the drone usages in those kinds of scenarios. And so with that, we are a little over time, and I don't see any other questions from the audience. So I would just like to thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today and for that great presentation, and for the very interesting Q&A discussions. Um, I'd also like to thank our partners at SATE, in particular Michelle, for helping us organize the series, and of course Wade for all of his support um, as the um, as the research chair for SATE, and for all of his support again with putting together this series, um, and for all of the collaborations that we've been able to do with you and SATE. And of course, also thank you to everybody in the audience for taking the time to be here with us and for asking questions and interacting. Um, and I hope that you all have also learned a lot and taken a lot away from this presentation, which I'm sure you all have. And yeah, just with that, I would like to also remind everybody that this is the last session for the year, but not the last session in the series. So we will be back in January to continue on the third Thursday of every month. So we will be back. I believe it will be January 16th for the next session. So please mark that down on your calendars, and share it with anybody in your networks who might be interested in this series. This registration is always open and free. And this session is being recorded and will be put up on our YouTube channel as soon as possible. So if you would like to reference it again, or if you would like to share that within your networks as well, please feel free to do so as soon as it's up. Um, and with that, just one last big thank you to everybody. It was a great session. And I look forward to the new year to continue with the series. And I wish you all a great day and happy holidays.